The following is a work of critical analysis. It is not intended as a work of piracy, and it is covered under fair use as a transformative critical work. We come in once again on Kyon opening his eyes to the world. By now this visual motif is so well established and so prominent within the film that we begin to look at the differences between the times we remember seeing him open his eyes. In most of those instances, he immediately saw a dark or blue or gray world. But the color palette in this scene has completely shifted away from anything we knew previously. That even includes the bold colors when Haruhi was in the film, as everything we see now is more pastel, and not only generally befitting of the falling action of a film, but also of a recovery process, or a reward scene. And once again, we're entirely inside the mind and point of view of Kyon. The camera does a cute little work here where it pans back and forth as Kyon swings his head around, and finally lands on Koizumi cutting the apple. The apple's actually a really good symbol, and it's got a number of different readings. First, apples in general can be seen as sort of a reward for accomplishing a goal, as the Japanese kanji used in the word for fruit is exactly the same as the one for reward. That is, the literal translation of kudamono, the word for fruit, means reward or completion or finish thing. That's also another thing that you can see in Penguin Drum. Furthermore, we have the instant visual joke of Koizumi using a knife, which has direct implications back to what Kyon last saw, including a knife and red blood flowing everywhere. But also there's a very subtle subtext that I'm not quite sure was intended, but still fits. That is, Koizumi's peeling the apple. He's removing the superficial outer layer of the food to show the vulnerable and soft insides. Past that, him doing such a menial activity shows his boredom and the passage of time in how long Kyon's been in the hospital. Throughout this scene, we're going to see a number of camera movement tricks, such as zooms in, shots of random, seemingly random things, and just a general confusion for where the camera wants to be. And that mirrors Kyon's confusion and sort of touches on something that Koizumi will talk about later. So Kyon first asks Koizumi if he knows who Kyon is, and Koizumi responds that that's a strange question, of course that he knows who Kyon is. And that's just confirmation that we are finally back in the original timeline for both Kyon and the viewer. And the second question Kyon asks is, when is it? Which is very important, as the movie has gone out of its way to set up the date and the time immediately after Kyon wakes up. He would say the morning of December 18th, or something along those lines. And Kyon wants to return to the repetition of his everyday life and his comfort there. Also, the movie certainly does this to give us a sense of the plot and the time, and with so much time travel and jumping about and redoing days, it's very important to know when everything's going on. That said, we've not returned to the 18th. It is the 21st, and everything that happened is now behind us. And while the camera is high here, I want to make note of the familiarity of the banter between Koizumi and Kyon, that they have certainly returned to how they interacted in The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya with this little exchange. There's a couple very weird shots, including this one of the air conditioner, that really make you wonder why they're included. But I think it's very obvious when we have Koizumi later state, "Why are you looking around the room? Are you searching for something?" I think not only is Kyon very much searching for something, but I think there's a relation back to what we saw whenever we were in Yuki's world, with the emphasis on the backgrounds and the world in general. Kyon is now looking at things that would be normally considered unimportant because of everything he's just experienced with Yuki. Could it be that he's learned something? Or could it be that he's just not interested in whatever Koizumi's saying? So, Koizumi's explanation of what happened to Kyon in this timeline, I don't think is really important or necessary for anything other than tonal reasons. That is, we should only just be confused by that. Kyon doesn't know what actually happened in this timeline, nor does Kyon really understand why he was allowed to keep the memories of the previous timeline. We, as viewers, are hearing this for the first time, as Kyon is. So the only thing this is really doing is confusing us. And once again, putting us in the same position as Kyon. There is a bit of value in Koizumi's tale of how the girls in the club reacted to him being injured. After a whole movie of Kyon figuring out what the other characters mean to him, it's kind of sobering to hear the other side of the coin. Koizumi's further description of the play that they were going to put on for the children, where Haruhi would be Santa and Kyon would be a reindeer, is not only funny in sort of a power dynamic sort of way, but is also obviously a reference back to the first monologue of the series with "Believing in Santa is so stupid." The line about the mystery woman is a good bit of intrigue and possibly more information for a sequel, but it's not really relevant and Kyon doesn't really react in any way. If it is Asakura, so what? So there's two bits that I have a problem with in the dub of this scene. First off, Kyon asks, "Is there anyone else here?" And in the Japanese, Koizumi responds with, "Why have you been looking around the room?" And in the English, Koizumi responds with, "Were you expecting someone else?" And generally pokes at Kyon for being so obvious. I think the first line is just a bit better because it matches up with the visuals that we've seen since Kyon woke up. And then once again we have Koizumi's line of still being jealous of Kyon. Obviously he's talking about Haruhi sleeping next to him for 3 days straight, but still. It's this back and forth that we've seen in their relationship since even before Endless 8, where Koizumi constantly insinuating how good Kyon has it, and then Kyon sarcastically shrugging it off or dismissing it. It really fits like an old shoe at this point, but what makes that very good setup is the next little bit. On his line that she's been at his side for 3 days straight. There's no way that Kyon can ignore his relationship with Haruhi now. After what we saw in the climax, he's not about to, and he's still not as open as a person as he would like to be, so he can't come out and admit his feelings. But he does thank her in the upcoming scene. And then we have the same directing trick that we saw before. Look at Koizumi's distance from the pair in this shot. Look at Kyon's position in this one. Scribbling on the face is also a very little and very potent touch about showing their relationship. When she wakes up and wonders if he's done it, and he certainly thought about it, where Koizumi never would. Just look at the gentle motion of Kyon when he touches Haruhi. He brushes her hair out of her face and then touches her lips very softly and smiles. Look at how she's framed with her entire face taking up the screen. And remember what we said about it being so rare to have two characters in the shot at the same time with both of their faces shown. And that's something that's really only happened between Haruhi and Kyon. Here it happens again. Also note the diffusion of the light throughout the room. This has no dark spots. There are no hard shadows. And that's very much because of the way that light functions in this relationship, or what light means as symbolic of their relationship. And here we have this second line that I think is kind of awkward in the English dub. Haruhi says, "You can't just expect a girl to be ready like that." Haruhi as a character first would never refer to herself as a girl. In fact, she's not about labels on gender or any type of external identity. So having her refer to herself as a girl is just kind of baffling and wrong. In the Japanese dubs, she simply says, I could have prepared. I had preparations to do. Something like that. One of my favorite little cuts is the drool line, because once Kyon says that, the pacing is so quick that she's already wiping it off her face. And that's such a good little capstone for that bit of physical comedy. And a really nice trick that we would see KyoAni take and make into its own entire series later with Nichijou, or My Ordinary Life. Miss Asahina's reintroduction just pulls her back into the film to wrap it up, meaning that we don't have to talk anymore about it, except that they fall comfortably back into the pre-disappearance dynamics that we had, with Haruhi being overconfident, Miss Asahina not really being able to express herself. Just the general status quo is reestablished in this scene. Something else we could say about the shot composition here is the blocking of having Haruhi stand at the bottom of Kyon's bed easily lets the camera look at Haruhi's face while still being placed with inside Kyon. And it also provides us with the shot of her and her alone being again in the center of the world and the thing that everything else revolves around. And this is what Kyon took the knife for. This is why he changed the world back, so that he could have that shot and this scene here. So we are shown it as a reward for what Kyon went through. The whole movie is meaningful because we get to see Haruhi wake up next to Kyon and be who she is in this scene. These transition shots are so nice and so subtle. Just the light versus dark aspect here. The scene transition gradually goes from the filling and omnipresent light of that hospital room to gradually being focused in one point, or coming from some part off the screen and getting less and less as the transition montage goes along and as the sun sets. We see more and more dark things invade the frame, like these doors and the molding here. Eventually the light gets confined to one area on the screen, and in this scene when Kyon finally reaches Yuki on the roof, it's only out there in the city. The old color palette has returned, and everything we knew about the light generated from the relationship between Haruhi and Kyon has vanished or gone and will return another day. And in that darkness, we have a mirror of the very first time Yuki and Kyon met in this movie. So in Kyon's monologue, he explores the discrepancy with the choice he had to make. The fact that loving someone as a person was intrinsically linked to abandoning this world and all of the activities in this world and everything he knew about Haruhi. Now he doesn't regret his decision at all, but he's still very confused at trying to work out these two different goals. With him repeating what is said, he kind of chalks it up as unknowable, just one of those things that happens and everything worked out for the best, let's not dwell on it any longer. But it's not resolved yet. Yuki's introduction to this scene is so very subtle. Look at the first shot of her shoes, then it turns back to Kyon, who, even though there's been no sound, turns around and looks at her. That is character growth. That is Kyon being more aware of the world around him and the small and minor things. Then look at how these shots are arranged. It's full portrait shots. They go back and forth between Yuki's point of view and Kyon's point of view, which is something very powerful because Kyon has been the only person we've ever been placed into the point of view of in this film. And also with the full portrait shots, it minimizes the distance between them. that we're not really sure how far away they are. They're actually very, very close from what it feels like with this camera shot. But then that is shattered by this shot. Kyon, in the same way that he greeted Haruhi, greets Yuki. Very important. But there is a large distance that needs to be crossed before they can become close. And Yuki starts to do that. She comes to him instead of setting up a situation where he would come to her. Here's a big deal of character growth. Yuki admits that her setup was at error. She admits to knowing about what she was going to do and willingly going through with it anyway. She admits to taking agency here. Whether that was right or wrong, whether she did it incorrectly or not, she owns up to it. As Kyon is explicating that, what does he do? He approaches her and then moves past her to give us this fantastic shot with Kyon to the right of Yuki, neither of them looking at each other. Kyon pops the big question here. Why would Yuki not speak honestly? Why would she not behave in a more natural way? Why would she not come to him and talk about her problems, or say something like, I would like you to appreciate me as much as you appreciate Haruhi? Yuki gives an evasive answer in that it wouldn't have mattered either way, or she wouldn't be able to. Just that she couldn't be that person, which is completely understandable, and that's something that Kyon has to respect. And then we have the entire theme of the show boiled down into Kyon's one phrase, I'm sorry. It's just that. It's, I'm sorry for never giving you what you deserved. I'm sorry for never looking at you as a person before. And I'm sorry for not being there for you or understanding what's really going on. And that crumples Yuki. That hits her hard. So now we have another one of these lost in translation difficulties that we have to talk about. In the Japanese version of the film, Kyon only says Yuki. Yuki, assuming that Kyon is saying her name, looks up at him expectantly. The same sort of joke also applies, but it loses a little bit of its subtlety in English because Kyon has to have the clarifying line of, that means snow, doesn't it? Another bit of cultural translation is lost here. Before now, Kyon always refers to this character as Nagato, in the sort of respectful Japanese way of doing things. The big change would be that he used her first name, Yuki, in a sort of familial or personal type of way. Now, the subtlety still does apply in English. Kyon refers to her as Nagato, and here he says Yuki. However, that cultural context is lost in translation. But this is the moment that we've been talking about. This is the moment that would have avoided Kyon's terrible stabbing. This is Kyon realizing her as person. Yuki is a friend and somebody he will fight for to defend and somebody he appreciates, a complicated full person, whereas Nagato is a plot device. I think that's the revelation that's going on in Kyon's mind as he stares up at the snow. As the piano comes in, we see that they've not only crossed the distance, but also have seen the world in Yuki's point of view, that it's not about characters and bold and being in the center of the screen, but it's more about everything around the characters, and that's how she sees the entire world in her point of view. And right here in this scene, that's exactly what Kyon is sharing with her. And there's a lot of direct symbolism here too. The snow is soft, gentle, everywhere, but mostly in the background, but it's also silently beautiful, and something that can be appreciated and enjoyed. And on that note, we see Kyon validate his new point of view on Yuki. This is the point where he conveys to Yuki how much she is worth to him as a person. It is a very powerful scene, and it does a number of things. First, Kyon kneels, putting Yuki higher than him and more important than him. Secondly, the shot composition makes it so that both characters are on the screen at the same time, something we haven't seen for Yuki and Kyon since that first scene where Kyon shoved her out of her chair and pushed her up against the wall, but they were still cut off even though they were so close, and it was awkward and painful, and because Kyon didn't understand Yuki, he caused a lot of pain to her and to himself. Also, he touches her so very gently in a way that directly mimics what he did with Haruhi. That's first the greeting, and now the interaction with the physicality that is exactly the same with how he treats Haruhi. And finally, he hasn't moved past her. He's stopped right in front of her. And this is very much a proposal, a promise. And I suppose in lieu of grabbing her close and telling her over and over again, I love you, I love you, I love you, this is probably the best way Kyon could convey the value she has to them. I think it's very much a growth moment for Kyon. He saw what Haruhi did for him, and he extended that to Yuki. Not only does he empathize here, but he moves himself from his normal state of inaction. That is, he promises something and goes off on this long tangent about how he'll make it come to pass and his plan in a way that sounds very Haruhi-esque, simply because he's motivated now. He understands that that is valuable to him, that Nagato being a part of his life is just as important, or maybe not just as important, but important along the same lines as Haruhi is. In effect, he's resolving the false dichotomy that Yuki set up in the Disappearance. And of course, I can't help but feel that if he had said something along these lines on the night of the 18th to that Yuki, instead of what he did say, then he would have been able to escape without punishment. And that's exactly what Yuki does here, and that's because they're justified. Everything is right, and appreciating people for who they are is the ultimate triumph of the show. So not only is it rewarded by thank you and transmitting, but it's rewarded by there being no negative repercussions. There's nothing wrong about Kyon appreciating Yuki. That's what should happen, and that's what the movie offers to us in its penultimate scene as the final resolution where everything works out correctly. Just seeing Kyon's normal apathy overwritten with this righteous anger as he stares up at the sky and clenches his fists, that's just one of many reasons why this movie is so great.
Thank you.
So now we have the epilogue of the disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya, the last piece of content that's ever been officially released for this anime. We come back in on the final instance of Kyon waking up to his alarm clock and opening up his eyes. Our old friend, the ridiculously impossible to interpret beam of light, has made its return. We have the joke of him rolling into his blanket, we have the date and time stated again, and we have a reprise of the music we heard earlier in the film, the sort of inviting, upbeat tone as Kyon bicycles to class today. As we're shown everything going back to normal, Kyon makes a note of it. So the rest of the scene is pretty much just a wind down for the movie and a recap of where the situation is. But I do want to note two things. First, Kyon attempts to pull the bookmark out of his pocket in sort of a validation or look back over everything that happened, but he finds the receipt for the stuff he bought instead. That works out nicely with his line saying that he can't go back, doesn't want to go back, and isn't looking back. The other thing I'll note about this scene is what a poor coda it really is to the continuing misadventures of Haruhi and Kyon. That even though this is where the series stops, it's also just a cliffhanger to end all cliffhangers. They still have to resolve everything that's happened, and there also needs to be some more growth yet until Kyon can finally accept and be honest about everything that Haruhi means to him, not just the fun aspect, but Haruhi as really his girlfriend. Add into that the fact that Koizumi and Miss Nagato still have plenty of room left for Kyon to explore their relationship, and it really feels like the series isn't done, which of course it absolutely isn't. What makes it even funnier, though, is the way Kyon really breaks the fourth wall in the end scene here. He turns towards the camera and, looking at us directly, says, "You can wait a little while, can't you, world?" And I don't think there's any other way to see this final little bit than KyoAni actually talking to us as consumers and as the world, saying, "Calm down, we'll return to this when it's necessary." Well, yeah, we can wait a little while, KyoAni, but it's been 5 years now, and still continuing, so here's hoping we see more of Haruhi and Kyon and the rest of the SOS Brigade sometime in the future. Oh, we've still got a little bit to analyze here. Let's go line by line on Yuki Nagato's song, because I think it's one of the most impactful ways to end this story. Also, I'm very much tone deaf, but I can still tell that her voice actress does an amazing job singing this, especially with it being all a cappella. What is your wish? That's the question I ask. Now, who is she talking to? On first glance, we could see that it's Kyon. Which world do you want to return to? But I think it also applies to Yuki as well. She's asking herself, what is your wish? Do you want to be a normal girl? Or do you want to be appreciated by your friends? Do you want to have feelings and emotions? Or is it something else? I don't need anything. That wasn't a lie. I think it's clear now that she's talking about herself. And the fact that she doesn't need anything. I think the really important piece on that line is it is the past tense. She didn't need anything, but now that's changed. And note how she inflects that verb, and she takes quite a while to hit that ta on nakata, which is the past tense form of it. So she's deciding whether she's going to say uso de wa nai, that is not a lie, or uso de wa nakata, that was not a lie. Even in the vanished world, there is a place for me. So the word vanished or extinguished is kind of odd here. Is she talking about the post-disappearance world? Because there was obviously a place for her. She created one. Or is she calling the world with Haruhi and the normal timeline a Kieru Sekai, or a vanished or disappeared or extinguished world? Her being proud of having a place in the world with Haruhi in it would make a lot more sense, so let's go with that. Even for me, who doesn't know it, that she's somehow not aware of everything going on, or not aware of her own feelings and able to express them, I think is the big takeaway from this line. My imprisoned consciousness was bound by time. This translation's a bit weird. She ends on a noun form here. So it's pretty difficult to say who's doing the binding. Still, I think the line is just a general regret or remorse for her position as plot device. It could also be a reference back to Endless 8 and the endless time she had to repeat. And I repeat my wish until we meet again. Again, her wish to feel, her wish to be noticed, her wish to be loved. It's hard to say. Until we meet again could be in reference to her changing the world and knowing that Kyon would come back, or it could be her still speaking about Endless 8. And don't forget me simply being, show me that I have value, validate me. Through all the days that pass by, all that's left for me is my memories, or maybe I've forgotten. And forgotten here could either be translated as forgetting memories or oblivion. And I think that's very clearly that last scene on the rooftop, where if Kyon does not come up to her and say those things, that's oblivion. That's the end. That there's nothing else. Before long, sleep besets the world, endless references back to Kyon waking up and her changing the world while everybody slept, but also sort of an existential question. Very much along the lines of everything fades, what's the point, everyone dies. And the call and response to that is sort of each person returns to tomorrow, though I think it might be better translated as each person returns to their tomorrow. She says hitori, one person, twice. Sort of everyone to their own tomorrow returns. And that would imply the separation that we see in Kyon returning to his own world. The door that looks to the chosen future. Pretty simply just referencing the path Kyon took. Even if my wish is granted, don't forget me. Well, this implies that we know what Yuki's wish was, and I think it's clear that she doesn't even know what she wished for. What she does know, though, is that she doesn't want to be forgotten, and she doesn't want to fade into oblivion. And certainly not gently, either. Which is the title of this song. A repetition of Don't Forget Me, and then a callback to an earlier lyric, even in the vanished world, there is a place for me. Which now sounds like a resolution against the crippling existentialism and decision to embrace the new world with Haruhi in it. And again, even for me, who doesn't know it. And I see that as really an admission that this is an interpersonal thing, that it comes from someone outside yourself. That to be validated by other people is inherently reliant on other people. And the don't forget me is a plea that even in this world where we have these fun things, now you still must appreciate me for all that I am and not just fall back on me being plot device again. Don't forget that I'm Yuki, not Nagato. And the very last line, I think, is one of the best in the entire film. She's saying throughout this song that she needs people, or she needs people to remember her, or give her some validation. And then her last line is, at least until I can do it myself, or I can remember. Or prop me up until I grow enough as a person that I'm able to know who I am and be comfortable in my identity and own that. And that's exactly what placing this setting in high school, that's exactly what putting Haruhi as this dejected character, that's exactly what this whole movie was all about. Like, give me that strength. Kyon, please grant that to me. And then I'll take that and I'll flourish with it. And I'll grow as a person and become a real human being. Someday I'll be capable of that. And maybe my special circumstances make that hard and make that difficult and require even more attention. But in this song we have the assurance that Yuki can and will grow into someone full and a complete human being who is able to not only love other people but also love herself. But until she gets there, until she climbs that mountain, she just needs you there beside her to support her. Just for now. The kicker scene is simply a little callback to the one positive memory Yuki kept from the melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. The kid on the left has a shirt that reads Return, which is the enter button, and it's generally just implied that the only thing that happens here is Yuki smiles when she sees this, but it's hidden by the book. That would be to say that she has emotions and she will continue to have emotions in the future and maybe develop more as a full-fledged person, kind of like exactly what she was talking about in the song. So we've come to the end of the disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya, and I hope that if you've watched these videos, you've understood a bit more about what makes this a masterpiece of animated storytelling. and in general, why someone would really love this series. Now that the analysis is done, I would like to speak a little bit on the personal side of things. I'm not quite sure why I am so enthralled by films that make the power of love or the power of friendship or anything other than physical or mental ability the trump card. But I find myself time and time again drawn to these types of shows, or shows that have this as a prevailing theme. Both The Melancholy and The Disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya, among other shows with the same theme, like Utena or Madoka Magica, are really the basis for how I attempt to approach interpersonal relationships. If you can love and appreciate Haruhi through watching this film, and two, if you can love and appreciate Yuki by watching The Disappearance, then you should be able to apply that to the real humans in your life. Just think of all the people that you label as coworker or acquaintance or anything along those lines. And just think that maybe they need someone just like Yuki did to prop them up and support them till they can stand on their own. Anyway, thanks for bearing with me throughout over 3 hours of analysis on one of the best anime movies of all time. If you'd like to contact me or suggest other things that I should look at, I'm available on Reddit's R True Anime board or in the True Anime Discord channel, which I'll link below. Once again, thank you for your time and for your attention.